Thank you, Florence. How are you all doing today? So very much is going on in the world. In the past couple of weeks, the Supreme Court has made some moves that will have untold repercussions, impacting gun rights, Miranda rights, less separation of church and state, and most recently, the overturning of Roe. All of this on top of the January 6th hearings, news about climate change continuing, and so much more. What a time we are living in. The topic for today is still focused on General Assembly, and for those of you who are new to our community and not familiar with it, you'll get a sense of what General Assembly is and why this is a topic for today. So the topic is about General Assembly and why we should care about the annual gathering of our association. But I could not stand here today and not address the most remarkable events that we just enumerated. I am imagining that you have had or are continuing a range of responses to all of this: outrage, shock, sadness, numbness, and so much more. I know that I have. Reverend Lynn Unger shared this poem a few days ago that sums up some of what I have been feeling. You are not wrong to be furious. You are not wrong to be scared. You are not wrong to wonder, what are we to do today and tomorrow and tomorrow? You are not wrong to notice the brilliance of the sky. You are not wrong to think of your daughter or anyone with a uterus. You are not wrong to imagine people you will never know. You are not wrong to think this really doesn't affect me, and know that it really does. You are not wrong to look for pictures of puppies and kittens and flowers and trees. You are not wrong to try to massage the ache out of your own heart. You are not wrong to yell or cry or scream or hide under the covers of your bed. You are not wrong to turn to your neighbor and say, what do we do now? My friend and a mentor to me, Lynn Cox, had this to say about that last question, what do we do now? They counseled, remember to breathe, find your people, lament, care for each other. Effective resistance to empire is rooted in relationship. Find your people. This is, my friends, why gathering together in this community and communities like this matters. This is why we are talking about General Assembly today and why we should care about the annual gathering of our association. I love this faith with all of our miracles and all of our mistakes. Coming into a UU fellowship so many years ago led me to finding some of my people. In some ways, it felt like finding an oasis of love and free thought in a desert of religious conservancy. I felt at home. I was a member of the York congregation. Welcome, welcome. I was a member of the York congregation for probably at least 8 years before I ventured out to another UU church. Our family found Roe Camp in Western Massachusetts to be a rather special place, but it was years after joining the York congregation that I made the connection that Roe was a UU center and that all I loved about it emanated from the Unitarian Universalist values that it was steeped in. And I think that many people who come to Unitarian Universalism happen upon a local congregation, make that their home, and they don't necessarily have much connection with other UU organizations or little understanding about our history and why we're organized the way we are. Unitarians and Universalists have quite a history emerging as heretical peoples who challenge the Christian status quo of the day. And I'm suggesting that that is still an incredibly important thing to do in the world in which we're living right now. Our Unitarian ancestors could not comprehend the thought that God existed as three persons, and our Universalist forebears could not fathom the idea that a loving God would damn a soul to hell for eternity. In an attempt to escape persecution in Europe, they made their way to the New World. And I want to clarify what I just said. I have so much respect and care about the true Christian words that are attributed to Jesus. They are rich, they are informative, they are life-saving. And what I have seen in the world today is that too often there are elements of proclaimers of that faith who are taking the precepts that have been taught by Jesus and turning them in a way that do not honor his words at all. And I think that's important to make the distinction. You know, you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. The words of Christ are so rich and so informative, but we have to be aware of how we use the words and what sources we feed ourselves upon. Many of the oldest member congregations of the Unitarian Universalist Association were founded by Puritan settlers in New England. And as a faith movement, we have rejected many of the precepts that they held dear, but our Puritan inheritance remains present through our organizational structure that we call congregational polity. And I know that history can get a bit thick sometimes, and so this isn't going to be a really in-depth history lesson, but I think it's important that we have a basic understanding of where we came from and why we do things the way we do. And why each year at General Assembly, we re-examine what we do and seek ways to engage change for the evolving times in which we live. The doctrine of congregational polity insisted that each congregation was to be governed by its own members so that individual communities would elect their own leaders and would have no need of a higher authority in the matter of church affairs. They were coming from traditions where there was a lot of dictating what should and should not be done, and they wanted more autonomy. So the autonomy of each congregation did not imply either self-sufficiency or isolation from other congregations. They were to be a community of independent churches with the caveat that they were giving and taking counsel and helping each other in other ways. And that is what we continue to do today. The Unitarian Universalist Association is the expression of the covenant of the promise of mutual care and support that each of our congregations makes to one another. As many of our kin gathered in Portland, Oregon for our annual General Assembly this past week, it seemed fitting to me to spend some time reflecting on this larger association of ours, particularly since this is the final day of GA for this year. And in fact, you are all invited to join a watch party here in the sanctuary at 12:30 to view the final worship service that will be live streamed from Portland. And I want you to keep in mind, so next year, GA is going to be in Pittsburgh. And wouldn't it be great if we would have a solid presence of UUs from Gettysburg taking part next year? Let's think about that in this coming year. So I'm going to pause a moment, and we have two folks, Peter Boving and Chris, who have had their own experiences of GA. So they're going to share a little bit of their experience, and then I'll continue.
Good morning. I'm Chris Eisel, and I'm a proud heretic. Delighted to be in front of you. So when we describe our church to new folks that we meet, we say we are small but mighty. We're actually not that small these days. We got more people during the pandemic than any other church in town, I think, for a variety of reasons, some of them existential and some of them, I need to find my people, right? So our small but mighty congregation is actually embedded in a web of over 1,000 congregations across the continental United States. We used to be in association with Canada. Canada now has its own separate and distinct denomination. We're still friendly. It was an amicable parting, but I was in Quebec City for General Assembly for the last year that we were together with Canada. And that was kind of a marvelous, it was like watching an uncoupling with great love, which doesn't always happen, does it? My notes will be brief. They're all over the place too, because I'm not thinking very linearly these days. So I've been to 3 General Assemblies, one when I was at my church in Fresno, California, and 2 when I was at my church in State College, Pennsylvania. I can't remember what one of the cities were, but Quebec City was one and Cleveland, Ohio was the other. One of the things I remember about my first General Assembly was that all the youth, all the teenagers got together and staged an impromptu campaign against homelessness. Like in 3 days, came together and launched a campaign against homelessness in the city where we were at. I went to workshops that I couldn't necessarily go to in Gettysburg because we're small but mighty, but I went to workshops on UU Buddhists, BUUdists, and on pagans, the Covenant of Unitarian Universalist pagans. I went to workshops, things that we're too small to have organized groups here unless somebody has the energy and enthusiasm to start them. But I was able to experience those things in the community of thousands of Unitarian Universalists who just like me. But my favorite story about GA was when it was in Cleveland, Ohio. And I had a legitimate spiritual experience, like an out-of-body, legit spiritual experience at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Something about Motown and UUs at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And listening to thousands of people sing Spirit of Life and Rank by Rank, which Florence played as the prelude this morning, lifted my spirits.
Good morning. I'm Peter Boving, and I've attended two of the GA conferences in person and one virtually. The one I want to talk about is 2016 in Columbus, Ohio, and you heard remarks earlier that I heard in person. You know, back when we did things in person. So, yeah. Our Reverends Carrie and Dave said, GA is in Columbus, Ohio this year. It's driving distance. We should go. I went. So it was wonderful. It kind of set me on fire a little bit. The banner parade is really inspiring when you see hundreds of banners, including ours, circulating. And they play Enter, Rejoice, and Come In over and over because there are so many banners that once through is not enough. The power of a couple to 3,000 UUs singing familiar hymns like Blue Boat Home, Rank by Rank, I've Got Peace Like a River. It's incredibly powerful and uplifting. And the street filled with people wearing yellow shirts like this one and like your stole. In Columbus, we filled the streets from sidewalk to sidewalk in protest of Wendy's and not being willing to pay a fair price for tomatoes. So we were in support of farm workers at that GA. We also had someone from the Westboro Baptist Church protesting us. And this was immediately following the assault in Orlando. So the first UU in Orlando arranged for the 10-foot high angels that protected people in Orlando when the Westboro Baptist Church was protesting during funerals. They came to Columbus and they were creating a barrier so that we didn't have to see the hecklers at our convention. And I was a representative of this congregation, and I was able to vote for the now outgoing president of the UUA. And it was a difficult decision between three excellent candidates, but I still think we got the best one. So, I've been very happy with Susan Frederick Gray and her work, primarily on immigration, which is close to my heart. I was also able to hear Dr. William Barber in person and Bill Sinkford in person at GA. So it's a very powerful experience, and Pittsburgh's closer than Columbus. So I think we should go.
So you got just a taste of the experiences that Peter and Chris had. And I'm going to just share a bit of mine. Peter mentioned the the parade of banners that takes place. So picture this, you're sitting, congregations, as Peter said, from all across the country have their banners, and Michelle made ours. And music playing, they process through the assembly hall, and it goes on and on and on. The first time that I attended GA, I carried the banner for my congregation. And initially I thought this was kind of corny, it's like, and I was moved to tears being in this hall with everyone. And I looked around and I felt myself to be a part of a family much, much larger than I could have imagined. I found my people. I also served as a delegate like Peter, which meant that I had a special responsibility to pay attention to business meetings so I could vote on matters that would shape the direction of our movement for years to come. And at times I was driven wild by the seemingly endless examination of language and Robert's rules. But at the same time, I developed an appreciation for a process that sought to embody our commitment to engaging in a democratic process in which all voices were intended to have equal weight, including our youth. And as was mentioned, they inspired me to no end. Hearing the proposals that the Youth Caucus brought forward and taking part in their worship services was a clear reminder to me that we must continually invest in our mutual future by supporting youth in every way that we can. And I'm really excited to see, now that we are meeting in person again, what this congregation is able to do as we start to reimagine, reinvigorate a religious education program. Right up there for inspiration at GA are the numerous workshop presenters and speakers. Over the years, the Ware Lecture has invited luminaries such as Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Kurt Vonnegut, poet Mary Oliver to address those assembled. And this year, the Ware Lecturer was author, educator, activist, historian Ibram X. Kendi, who has done so much work about how to be an anti-racist and what that means in the world today. While diversity certainly exists in this congregation, UUG's diversity pales in comparison to what you will find at GA. In such a gathering, you truly get a sense of what the beloved community can mean, a community in which so many expressions are brought together with a common desire to build a world in which all beings are valued, a world where people work for peace, liberty, and justice for all. But with that said, the reality of so many divergent expressions can also get messy, as the real work of figuring out how to live in right relationship with others who have opinions as strong as yours as those conversations take place. Like others in the world, our movement struggles to decenter whiteness and the ways in which LGBTQAI+ folk, people of color, and other marginalized siblings are too often kept on the sidelines. The piece that Eleanor read earlier, Tapping Out of Fake Fights, was an excerpt from the Sunday morning worship service. And it serves to me again and again as a reminder to stay focused on the bigger issues, to keep our egos in check along the way. You know, to paraphrase or to quote Dr. King, keep your eye on the prize. GA is a pressure cooker. In such an environment, one is flooded with new ideas and challenged to live in the principles that guide us. And for those of you who are new, I believe that you'll find our principles listed in the hymnal and certainly in the back if you're interested for getting a better idea of what those principles are. And we now have an 8th principle that is focused on working to accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions. GA is an environment in which we are called out and called in. At GA, we see how hard we are working as a movement to create a world with a shared vision. And we become very aware of the missteps our movement has made and the distance that we still need to travel. We are reminded that though we are a small but mighty movement, our values are so resonant and so very much a remedy for the ills of our times. If we were embodying our principles, this world would be a vastly different place. We are reminded that together we can do what we cannot do alone. And we are called again and again to take action, to pray with our hands and our feet and our voices and our votes. The primary purpose of the UUA is to serve the needs of its member congregations, to organize new congregations, to extend and strengthen UU institutions, and to implement those principles that we hold dear. We are reminded that the work we do in this congregation is important. It's important on a personal level because we like to be in community with people that feed our spirit. We like to know that we're not alone, that we're valued just as we are. Yet just as important is what we collectively do on the larger stage, whether it's in Gettysburg, in Adams County, or the United States as a whole and beyond. Our world is crying out for a healing of divisions. In many ways, we are uniquely situated to bring this healing to the world when we truly live our values. This small community in Gettysburg has a very important role to play. Without strong local congregations, the UUA has no impact. As each of us needs one another to survive, so too do our individual congregations need each other to survive. And that is why several UU ministers in this region are joining together on August 13th, inviting all who can take part in our first UU revival. This will be in York, Pennsylvania, Rocky Ridge Park. Peter's going to help organize carpooling and such. Bring your own picnic. It's from 11 to 4. We'll have games, we'll have music, we'll have a worship service, a time to bring us together for fellowship and fun, to create new connections and to strengthen old ones so that we recognize anew that we are not alone and that we need each other more than we know, particularly going into this year's midterm elections. We need to join with others who share the values we hold dear and make sure that we are living our values out loud in this incredibly important time in history. Faith leaders at this year's GA stressed the importance of expressing our faith voice in all of our spheres of influence. We cannot let the far right continue to co-opt faith and family values as if they were the sole owners of such values. Say it out loud, say it proud that you side with love and all of its expressions. Being reminded of the importance of what we do within this faith community helps us to clarify our values anew. When we understand how we fit into the interdependent web, like the Inca bridge builders, we find ways to do our small or large part in the very best way that we can, so that we can indeed build our way toward our shared vision of a world that is safe and welcoming for everyone. You are needed, for this work cannot happen without you. And now please join as you are able in singing our closing hymn, again, Rise and Body Your Spirit, the Teal hymnal, hymn number 1028, Fire of Commitment.